magic hour. So I'm going to go ahead and call to order the special meeting of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board of Directors. Today is Friday, June 19th, 2020. And let's see. Our first order of business is a series of items to discuss in closed session. So, Council, I will turn to you to let us and the public know what we will be discussing in closed session.
John, you're on mute, John.
Unmute. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. Items 2A through C, bear with me 1 second. I just lost my screen. There we go. The first item, 2A, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9AD1, California Native Plant Society versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court case number 20CV001529. That's a matter of pending litigation. Then we have on items 2B and C, both are conferences with legal counsel. Both are anticipated litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2. The first one is based on a receipt of a notice of intent to sue from Keep Fort Ord Wild. And the second is based on a receipt of a claim pursuant to Government Claims Act by Resource Environmental, Inc. So we can now adjourn that. Well, those will be the, those will be the subject of discussion in closed session.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Giffen. Is there any member of the public who has anything they would like to say to the board before we go into closed session? You can raise your hand using the participant function. The raise hand button is at the bottom of that. And if you raise your hand, we will see it and can call on you, let you make any comment you might have about closed session items. I'm not seeing any hands being raised, so I will close public comment and we will move to our breakout room. Return as soon as we can. Okay, looks like most people made it back. Good, so I'm going to reconvene the special meeting of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board of Directors for Friday, June 19th, 2020. And Council, would you announce any action taken in closed session?
Council?
Oh, we lost him in the shuffle.
Did we lose council?
Uh-oh. Oh, no, there he is. He's there.
There he is.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Chair and members of the board and public. The board met in closed session on items 2A through 2C. A, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9AD1, California Native Plant Society versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court case number 20CV00159, pending litigation. Council updated the board on the status of the matter. There's nothing to report on that case. 2B, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2. That's based on a receipt of notice of intent to sue from Keep Fort Ord Wild. Nothing to report there. And finally, 2C, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2, based on a receipt of claim pursuant to Government Claims Act by Resource Environmental, Inc. The board heard from counsel, gave direction to counsel, and there's nothing to report.
Thank you. Thank you for that report out. We'll move now to item 4 on the agenda, which is acknowledgements, announcements, and correspondence. Mr. Metz.
Thank you, Chair Parker and members of the board and the Monterey Bay community. I hope you'll indulge me today just a little bit with some extended acknowledgements, announcements, and brief note on correspondence. But I think there's a few things worth noting, and one of them is what was announced last time, the receipt of this, the completion of the bond issue. So that you'll notice Mr. Northcross is here. I've asked him to join us again because he missed that on the last one. So, but before I get to that, I'll start with the date. Today's June 19th, known as Juneteenth. And as I was riding into work today, I was listening to the NPR story on this item. There was a professor at University of Austin that was describing how it celebrates the learning by the slaves in Texas of their emancipation that had occurred many months prior. And it struck me that it's particularly noteworthy in this age of fake news, the urgency, imperative, importance of transparent and open governance. And so I think it really spoke to me as a professional in the field that everything I can do to make information available to the public about what is happening in their government. And I know many of you deal with that every day. So I thought it was a noteworthy comment on a much more significant issue that continues to unfold across our country. So that's the note on the date. I also wanted just to take a few moments to acknowledge the work of this board and its staff and the staffs of each of its relevant jurisdictions, the fairly significant body of work that's been accomplished over the last 6 months, as we're now about 11 days from our conclusion. I wanted to note that this board has met 16 times in 6 months. So more than a year's worth of meetings have been scheduled and held, or will be by the time we're done. We have completed within that the Habitat Working Group was convened early in the year and held 12 meetings in 12 weeks, the first part of the year, that led to a solution on the habitat that included distribution of $17 million worth of funds set up to conserve habitat across the Fort Ord area that will now be used for that purpose by the individual jurisdictions. He also completed the transfer of the ESCA and the local redevelopment authority responsibilities and obligations to the city of Seaside. That was a major federal agreement that was multiple months in processing that was completed. The team at ESCA is now with Seaside. And just this week and next, we will be signing the final property transfer documents to complete the transfer of the remaining ESCA properties. So those are some major accomplishments. The CIP projects that accounted for about $12 million worth of funds are either have been or are in the process of being transferred now to the relevant jurisdictions. The responsibility for road construction is now sits with TAMC. I see Mr. Muck there with his nice background joining us today. Of course, the water, ongoing responsibilities for provision of water now sit with MCWD. There is economic development activities that have been completed and continue. Certainly the campus town consistency determination that was one of our unanimous motions last week. That is a big step, leads to a really great project now on track for the city of Seaside. And many of you know I've been intimately involved in this drone automation and robotics technology initiative now from my economic development days for some time. Next week, we're coordinating with our partners at UC Ag and Natural Resource Division, the second drone camp that's happening now. It's been expanded. It's all online, and the participation has gone from 75 up to 323 participants from around the country and a few other countries. We're still working with the UC on the future of UC Best. We're also working with the city of Marina and others on the long-term retention of Joby Aviation at the Marina Airport. And we are still holding our DART Symposium online in October. So those are all things that are continuing. Now, not to mention all the work that's been happening with the transition. Today, you're considering a transition plan update. This is a major policy update that will leave the region with a clear path forward. We've also completed working in close collaboration with the county and others, transition of FORA records. We have on tap today your consideration of FORA Fiscal Administrative Services contract for post-FORA activities. And of course, we've been working quite regularly with LAFCO. So that's been some major work, all the work in litigation. We got to give a big nod to our team at Cag Law, who have been working day and night on that issue, as well as the language and all the agreements. Mr. David Willoughby deserves special recognition for this. He's been burning the midnight oil on both ends. So I really want to give him a nod for that. And then, of course, the FORA staff has remained. Now we're down to, I think it's 4 or 5 of us here, 5 that have stuck it out here to the end, and will be doing so, getting the final boxes together and taking posters off the wall and transitioning computers and equipment to various to the county and so forth. So that's been a real great team to work. And of course, we did all that transitioning to a remote meeting environment that we've been doing all of this within a global pandemic. So those are all noteworthy. And to conclude, of course, I'd like to just note about the building removal, which has been a long-standing desire of the community and hard work of this board. Just behind our offices, your folks, your partners at the Marina Community Partners have just completed and sent to us this week the final waste transfer manifest to get all of the buildings, or I'd say there's a few left up there, but they'll be coming down now with Marina's funds. All the buildings on the C-Deck Hill, it's like a new landscape. If you haven't been out here lately, I highly recommend to drive by. It's really exciting to see that happening. And then finally, the $30 million tax revenue bond that was brought in and announced last week wouldn't have happened without Mark Northcross and his leadership and cheerleadership. The amount of twists and turns that process took over the last year and a half was incredible for me as a neophyte in that area. It was just a tremendous experience to be part of, and I really think deserves acknowledgement. That's why I asked Mark to be here, and if we could at least give him some applause, and even Mark, if you wanted to address this board finally, you've been a fixture with us all this time. I'll give you a pass the baton here for a few minutes if you want to say a couple words.
Well, it won't take a few minutes, but truly, it's been a pleasure working with all of you, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been a real challenge, but multi-stakeholder engagement is a way of life now and in the future. We're all going to need to learn how to do this. This is what the rest of our lives are going to be like in so many ways, dealing with challenges. And to each and every one of you in FORA, you all did a great job. You all, dealt as very best as you could with dealing with your own constituents and then trying to find a compromise through FORA. What a challenge it is to deal with this. As people have noted, this is the largest apparently base reuse program in the United States, and you all deserve a lot of credit for all of you hanging in there and just seeing this through. So congratulations to you. It's been a pleasure to be part of this. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Mark. I know you're going to have some comments, but before I pass the baton finally, I would just like to make sure, I know there's a lot of people out there, and as I look on the screen here, I don't want to miss anyone. I did want to call out just Wendy Strimling, who's been working late on getting some of these agreements done. So really fine work by the county's legal staff and all the members of the administrative committee that have helped us. So with that, I'll certainly, you can make comments in response to Mark, and then I just have a few correspondence to note before we move on from the item.
Okay, so that's it on the announcements, right? So you'll talk
That's it
about
on
letters.
the announcements.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I will, let me see if any members of the public want to make any comments on this, and then I'll bring it back to the board. Are there any people attending this meeting who would like to make any comments on any of the announcements that have been made? If you are, well, you are in the Zoom meeting, and if you would raise your hand using the participants tab and the raise hand function at the bottom, or raise your hand the old-fashioned way, and I will ask my keen-eyed friends to watch for you. All right, so I'll bring it back to the board. Director Garfield, and then Director Hoffa, and then Director Adams, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Northcross, you allowed all of us to kind of geek out about the details for this bond issue, if we wanted to. And it was really an exciting process to watch. You made complex things seem simple and helped us walk our way through some pretty treacherous stepping stones and unexpected curves. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I thank you and your team enormously for getting us to here. And Ms. Strimling, you always make a difference. You clarify things, you bring up stuff that should be known, and it's really not necessarily what I wanted to hear, but I'm really glad you're on the team. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hoffa?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Mr. Norcross and also Josh for guiding us through this difficult process. I also wanted to give some acknowledgement to Director Morton, who for years has tried to say we need to make building removal a priority. I've tried to be supportive of her on that. To the City of Seaside, their city manager for coming up with this idea, and for the board working through unbelievable challenges from the state finance department, putting up a roadblock, to having a short period of time due to FORA sunset, to an economic collapse and pandemic, and a lawsuit. So through all of that, we've managed to get here. And of all of the things that FORA has done in my time, this is, I think, the thing I'm most proud of, because we're going to see buildings come down, and that's going to open up the opportunity for redevelopment in the areas that our community is unanimous that we see happen on the formerly blighted lands. So good job by everybody.
Thank you. Director Adams?
Thank you very much. I offer thanks to all of the people who have been mentioned beforehand. It really has been quite a road trip, and I'm happy that I have been a part of it. But I really especially want to thank Josh. I feel that he has just risen up to the plate in a way that I don't think any of us could have been able to do. He has guided us. He has been the face of FORA under a lot of duress and stress, and he has handled it so gracefully, and with always with good nature and with good humor. And I know he's experienced a whole lot of stress. I really know this has been really tough on him. In fact, he had a full head of hair when he started this. And but I really do. I appreciate and value my colleagues so very much. I honestly do. And it's been fun to get to know each of you in a different way than I ever would have had before. So I thank all of you. It's been a terrific partnership. And Josh, you led us well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I think those who have spoken have really expressed a lot of the sentiments that we all feel. And thanks again, Mr. Northcross. I I don't know if you've ever had a bond issuance quite like this one, and you may not want to, ask for that again, but we'll be happy to just be your most interesting bond issuance in case we get close to qualifying for that. So, thanks for getting us through it. Okay, Mr. Metz, we'll turn it back to you for some correspondence.
Right. So we have received our usual slate of messages, some even received just today. I'll begin farther back. June 10th, we received a letter from the city of Seaside regarding the claim of REI versus FORA. June 11th, we received a letter from Stamp Erickson Law Firm regarding efforts to reach resolution with CNPS and FORA. Today, we received a letter from LAFCO regarding the 2018 transition plan. And also today, we received an email from Marina Community Partners commenting on the transition plan update. So those are provided in correspondence to the board, and I believe that's all that we have received up until just a few minutes at least before the meeting. Harry, did I miss anything?
No, I think you got everything.
Okay, so that would conclude the acknowledgements, announcements, and correspondence.
Okay, thank you. We'll move now to roll call. Mr. Tregenza, would you call the roll?
Supervisor Jane Parker.
Here.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Here.
Supervisor Mary Adams.
Here.
Councilmember John Gagliotti.
Was there? There he is.
He is here.
He's on mute. You're on mute, John. There you go.
Yeah, I'm here.
You. Councilmember Lisa Berkeley.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
Here.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa.
Here.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Here.
Councilmember John Wizard.
Here.
Mayor Mary Ann Carbone.
Here.
Mayor Joe Gunter. Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Here.
Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Here.
Catherine Moon. Colleen Courtney. Erica Parker. Todd Muck.
Here.
Dr. P.K. Diffenbaugh. I think he's going to be a few minutes late. Steve Matarazzo. Dr. Lawrence Samuels.
Here.
Colonel Gregory Ford.
Here.
Bill Collins. David Martin.
Here.
Lisa Breinheimer. And Derek Cray.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll move now to the consent agenda. We have one item, the board meeting minutes from the May 14th, 2020 meeting. Are there any board members who have questions or comments or corrections to the minutes? If you would raise your hand. Okay, not seeing any. Any member of the public with a question or comment on the minutes? Not seeing any hands going up, so I'll bring it back to the board for action. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the May 14th meeting.
Move to
So
approve.
moved.
Thank you. Let's see. I heard, I'll take Mary Adams as the maker of the motion, and who would like to be the seconder?
Second.
Okay, Director Garfield. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Tregenza, would you call the roll for the vote, please?
Supervisor Jane Parker.
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams.
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti.
Aye.
Councilmember Lisa Berkeley. I think you're on mute.
Muted.
Was that Carbone?
Can't hear. No.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Lisa, you can speak up and then we can hear you.
I am. There's.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. So,
Can you?
all right. I'll come back to you, Lisa. Mayor Pro Tem Gail Martin,
Yes.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye. Here.
Councilmember John Wizard,
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield,
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers,
Aye.
Lisa Berkeley.
You hear me now? Sorry
Yes.
about that.
Yes.
Okay. So yes on the vote. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We'll move now to our business items. First is a second vote on the final environmental impact report. Mr. Metz, do you want to say anything about
Well, sure. I'll remind you that this is a vote to adopt the resolution of findings, which certify the final EIR, including the response to comments and draft environmental to the draft environmental report for the Fort Ord's multi-species habitat conservation plan project. That is the recommendation number one. And number two is to take no action approving or disapproving the project itself. We do have your trusted environmental consultant who has led the completion of this project. Aaron Harwain is on the call if there's any additional questions or comments from the board.
Thank you. I think what I'll do is I'll open it up to the public. Is there any member of the public who wants to comment on this item? We discussed it a fair amount last week. But if there's anything anyone wants to say or question you want to raise, please raise your hand and we will give you a chance to speak. Not seeing any hands going up. I'll bring it back to the board. Are there any board members who have questions or comments at this point? Oh, hold on. Sorry. I see that Mr. Cheshire was raising his hands. He had to use both of them to get my attention. I'm so sorry. Please, any comments or questions on the final environmental impact report?
No, thank you, Chair Parker. I'd have to say maybe environmental issues aren't my strong point, but having read the MOA with the Army numerous times and knowing that they required such a study a long time ago, I can't understand why anyone would want to object to what's basically being proposed. And I think I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that I might have missed? Let me take a look here. Okay, not seeing any other hands. I will bring it back to the board. Any board members with comments or questions? You can raise your hand in the little participants tab. So as a procedural matter, okay, great. I see a couple of hands being raised. Director Adams and then Director Morton.
Thank you for your comment, Ron. I always listen to you. And I guess what I just do not understand is if, some groups feel like we are putting ourselves in harm's way by approving this and that it would do no harm to take no action. I just don't understand why we would take action. I just honestly don't. And I hear what you said about the Army, wanted this, but does that matter at this point? I don't really know. I'm still conflicted about this. I was last time. I voted no on it. I think Frank O'Connell and I were the only two that did. But I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me in some way. I wish I could be convinced, quite frankly.
Thank you. Director Morton?
Yeah, so to Mary Adams' point, I concur. We've been advised that certifying the EIR may open the door for litigation. The last thing that I want is, as a representative in FORA, that I've opened a door for litigation against the city of Marina and my other fellow jurisdictions. The Army required us to do a habitat management plan when the transfer of the property came to us. And in fact, all of the jurisdictions have responsibility for that habitat management plan within their city or county jurisdiction. And we will be complying with what those mandates are. This EIR was not a mandate from the Army. This EIR was because FORA had decided to pursue a habitat conservation plan that was base-wide. And for that project, we needed to do an EIR. And in fact, we have abandoned the project as infeasible, and this EIR is not necessary because there's no project. And so I think the jurisdictions that have made arguments that the studies will be able to be useful for when they do developments, they will have access to those studies. FORA has put a tremendous amount of money into place in having these studies made, but certification is not required for those studies to be referenced. And I am trying to prevent litigation as we walk out of the door and limit our liabilities, limit the objections that LAFCO writes to us about weekly. So I do not support certification. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other directors wishing to comment? As a procedural matter, Council, because this is a second vote, do we consider that that is a motion on the floor, or should we have another motion?
I think that's the motion on the floor. If it needs to be restated for people to be reminded, there's no problem with that.
Okay, great. I think Mr. Metz did that. So seeing no more hands, I'll ask Mr. Tregenza to call the roll so that we can take our second vote.
Director Parker, just a quick point of clarification. Hi,
yes,
Mr. Berkeley. So an I vote is in favor of adopting the EIR?
Correct.
Yes, if you vote yes, you would be voting in favor of approving the the certification, and if you vote no, it would be no. Thank you for that question.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Tregenza.
Supervisor Jane Parker.
No.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Yes.
Supervisor Mary Adams.
No.
Councilmember John Gagliotti.
Yes.
Councilmember Lisa Berkeley.
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
No.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa.
No.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Aye.
Councilmember John Wizard.
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
I have 7 ayes and 5 noes.
Thank you. So that passes with 7 to 5 vote. Thank you. We'll move now to business item 7B, another second vote. This is the unallocated funds distribution. And Mr. Metz, could you remind us what that was?
Let's see here. Give me a second, I can share. This was what we showed last time. It's on the board website. I think it's item 7C from the last meeting of the presentation itself. And this is our recommendation here. I will note that since we received this, there was a small adjustment in the county's need to administer a post-FORA fiscal and administrative services contract that would reduce this number by $15,000. So I'm not sure, maybe I'll look to John Giffen on the matter of how that might be addressed in the second vote, because I do believe the second vote is on the original item. So John, can you help me with that?
The second vote would be identical to the previous motion. So,
okay. So
I missed the first part of your issue.
Well, yeah. So there is a consideration for an item on this agenda. I think it's item 7E, which is the county's omnibus agreement, which includes the language about the additional $15,000. So I think you could take action on this one as presented and then deal with any change at the later item, if I'm not mistaken. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
So,
great.
So then this is the recommendation that you voted on last time, and the motion was in support of this recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll go to the public first. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on this item or ask a question? If you would raise your hand in the participants tab, the little raise hand button at the bottom, or wave your hands the old-fashioned way. I'm a little slow on seeing those because there are a number of people to scroll through here. Great, thank you. I see Sid Williams has raised his hand where I can see it easily. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Please go right ahead.
You're on mute, Sid. You got to unmute yourself there.
No, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you, Supervisor Parker. I'd just like to remind the board that you voted almost unanimously in accepting this project last time. And given the fact that there have been no new increases in requests for this particular item, I would strongly encourage you to vote again to pass this item to help all these different administrative expenses that need to be met and to help strengthen the Monterey County Veteran Services Office and to continue inputting information for the use of military properties here on Fort Ord. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Wendy Strimling has raised her hand. Please go ahead, Ms. Strimling.
I see the recommendation includes an amendment to the transition plan. Is that part of this motion? Because that raises, a lot of questions, which seems to be a different question than the allocation of funds.
Good question, thank you. Any other members of the public with questions or comments? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the board and maybe the staff can speak to the transition plan language that's referenced there.
Yeah, so this was put forward as language that could be included in the transition plan. Since the last meeting, there's been a fair amount of refinement of the transition plan update language that I believe incorporated some, if not all of this language. Is that correct, David Willoughby? Did we incorporate that in our most recent versions?
The concept has certainly been incorporated, although the wording has is not an exact match to what's here.
And I'm seeing Wendy with the head shake. I've gotten very good at interpreting Wendy's. Yeah.
Well, I want to defer to you in terms of public comment being over, but I will say no. I mean, I think the proposal that the county supports is that the remaining fund balance, that is what you haven't allocated out, would go to the county to pay for as unpaid bills, that there's an expectation that there'll be contractor bills, RGS, for example, Kendall services.
That's taken as a separate line item. And
right, but
yeah.
well, that's, I'm just saying, this seems to suggest that all of the extra money is going to go to CalPERS retirement plan. And so maybe it's just that it isn't worded clearly, but that, your sewer, your utilities, your lights, I mean, all that you're going, my
so
understanding.
that would all be covered by the upon closure for a books component, but I don't need to, if it's whatever the board wants to do here as far as that goes. This was proposed and voted on at the last meeting. So I think kind of staying consistent with what we've just done, the motion would be here, and then the transition plan will be the next item, and that can either incorporate this verbatim or include whatever refinements have been brought forward. This would be the first vote on the transition plan language.
Great. Good point to raise. Thank you. And I see that Kendall Flint has raised her hand, perhaps to respond to this, as well as Mr. Willoughby. So maybe I'll ask them to respond to this.
Thank you, Chair Parker. I just wanted to clarify for Wendy that this action item is specific only to the funds, and perhaps you can scroll back down, Josh. This was really specific to the allocation of the remaining funds here. And so it is it is not the same action as the transition plan itself or as the county's contract with FORA. So they are separate. So in the board's decision today, this is really only about the allocation of funds as laid out in this table. It is not about the transition plan.
And I think to the point about what about the bills that will need to be paid after FORA sunsets, I think what Mr. Metz mentioned was upon closure of FORA books. That's, that if there's money needed for paying those bills, that doesn't count as remaining funds. So I think good points to raise. I think we're okay. Mr. Willoughby.
I might just also add that it's expected that we're not going to know what the final liability for CalPERS is for 4 or more months after FORA has ceased to exist, and the expectation that this closure of FORA books process will be accomplished, or at least largely accomplished, well before there was, the decision of which funds to apply from the funds in the Section 115 trust, any supplemental funds that are directed that way, the allocation from the bond proceeds, and if by chance there was money left over after the satisfaction of FORA's established debts through the closure of its books, that could be available as well. But the real detail of this is in the transition plan, and Wendy Strimling and Les Gerard, and I'm sure the rest of the staff that have assisted them have been diligent in making sure that, as expressed in the transition plan and in the related contract for the county handling post-closure obligations, they've been very good at making sure that the language is consistent between each of those elements, and that we're not stepping into a kind of disarray of differing requirements.
Great, thank you. Director Morton, you have your hand up.
I do. So I think that Ms. Strimling's point is very well taken. The action item on the agenda both last week and this week is receive a report on the funding and provide staff direction. It certainly did not have any terms about directing how funds were going to be spent in the transition plan, which is another item on the agenda. So while I appreciate that this recommendation is stuck in here, this is not the scope of the second vote, is my understanding. The second thing that I want to ask is on those expenditures, you have administrative expenses, and the question that I have, having reviewed the transition plan that's coming up for discussion in a in the next item or 2 more items, I don't know where. But one of the key questions that I have, and you have them identified in our staff report on page 17, is we're expending $100,000 for services with Kutak Rock for the purposes of making sure the deed transfers happen with the Army. When FORA sunsets July 1, I'm going to ask this question both with regard to that legal contract, Kennedy, Archer, and Giffen contract, and regional government services, which is a little bit different. But who is the client? There no longer is FORA. So is in fact that FORA is giving $100,000 for Kutak Rock into their client's trust account, but is Seaside as the LRA accepting the responsibility and stepping into the place and stead of FORA for an attorney-client relationship that somebody is actually doing the client's bidding and not just legal counsel acting. You can't do that. I have the same question with regard to Mr. Giffen's firm, which is Kennedy, Archer, and Giffen, and I know Mr. Willoughby is part of that firm also. FORA's gone July 1. What action would this firm be taking and on whose behalf? So if in fact there's going to be a client, our transition plan is silent as to who is the client to which these legal people would be answering, because the client directs the attorney and makes the decisions for the attorney. That is a gaping hole there. Thirdly, with RGS, which is I think a much easier one to resolve because we mentioned the county as the secondary entity, but the county needs to accept that as an assignment and probably should sign the contract. Is FORA is putting up the money, but the county needs to accept that responsibility, and is that RGS is answering to the county for direction. So I look to those things being created. I don't have an objection with the amounts, provided we correct this glaring error in our transition plan. Otherwise, this money should not be spent. Thank you.
Thank you. Good points. Any other directors with comments or questions on this item? Mr. Metz, do you want to respond to the issues of sort of contract transferring, how that's planned to be handled? And then I saw that Director Oglesby had his hand up, but it went away. So.
Yeah, so all very good points, Director Morton, ones that are on our radar. I'll start with the RGS contract. The contemplation of that contract has always been that it would be signed. It would be an extension of their contract with FORA that would then be assigned to the county, and that's the way that it's set up in both the agreement with RGS and in the agreement with the county that is at the end of our business items today. So by the time we get through all that, assuming those are approved, that would all be codified and the path forward on that contract. Regarding the Kutak Rock funds, that was work that was necessary to complete the transfer of the remaining properties from the Army to FORA, and then FORA to the underlying jurisdiction. So that was work that will be completed before the end of this month, and then they will be concluded as a firm representing FORA, and will go and represent Seaside if they are contracted by the city of Seaside. Regarding the Cag Law Funds, those also are intended to be to address the significant amount of work that Cag Law is undertaking now in doing things like responding to the Stamp Erickson Law Firm actions and so forth between now and the end of the month. and that those funds would not be spent post June 30. Originally, there was some discussion about that possibility, but the particular issue that you raised about the attorney-client relationship has made that one that we've chosen not to advance here.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying all of that. Director Oglesby, did you want to speak to this item?
No, Chair, I think Josh just handled it well. So I was just going to say, anything Seaside needs to do that the board think we should do to handle it, we were able to do, but Josh spoke to the issue.
Great. All righty. Thank you. So this is a second vote. So we have.
So may I ask a follow-up question?
Yes. Yes, please.
I'm sorry. So the amount of funds last week when we looked at this, and the amount of funds that were being allocated was because it was for a contract that extended for 1 year beyond the date of FORA sunsetting. So why would the amount not therefore be reduced if the services are terminating July 1, 2020? Number one. Number two, if in fact they are going to be paid, they would be unused portions of this payment in advance would come back. We would expect it to come back immediately. And in the plan, the transition plan, we need to identify what's going to happen to those, which I think should go to the Calpers obligation. And then when you say our last item today is that the contract with RGS is going to actually be signed also by the county. I didn't see that on the contract. We were provided a copy of the contract last week. We're provided with the contract this week, and I see no signing by the county. And sitting as a director, I see no action by a county saying they've approved this. So I'm hammering these questions home because we have a week. Thank you.
Those are fair questions. The only contract that would extend through June 30, 2021 would be the RGS contract. The Kutak Rock contract will end June 30 of this year, as will the Cag Law contract. And that was the, I think you'll notice some of these numbers are round numbers. That's because the extent of the legal services needed between now and the end of middle of next week from now is uncertain, and we wanted to be sure that there were sufficient funds to address whatever needs came up. So that was, I think, the intent of the language that we included down here in this recommendation was that, these funds could be allocated into these categories for use. And then whatever funds were not used for those purposes could then be brought back to bear on settling FORA's first payments of clear debts, lighting bills or whatever, and then returned to settle the Calpers liability and thus freeing up more bond funds for building removal. So that was the thinking. And I think we've really tried to integrate that into the transition plan. I'll defer to our esteemed attorneys here, Willoughby and Strimling, who've both been burning the midnight oil on that language. And I see that Wendy's got her hand up probably to address some more details.
Go ahead, Ms. Strimling.
Madam Chair. With regard to the assignment of the RGS contract to the county, the agreement that you will see at the end of your agenda provides basically a contingent acceptance. We haven't seen that RGS contract or its extension, but the idea is that RGS would be very useful for all of the administrative and fiscal activities associated with winding up FORA's business affairs, having to do with issuance of W-2 forms, which doesn't happen until January, various and sundry administrative tasks that normally happen when you have the dissolution of an entity. And so This would provide for RGS to do that. But county, as stated in that agreement, would accept the contract and the assignment if the terms of the RGS contract are acceptable to the county and the contract is approved as to form by county council. We haven't yet seen a draft of that contract, but presumably, you know, we'll be able to be involved in the terms, whether it's a new contract or an amendment to the contract. And I think our understanding is that it does not include all the work RGS has done for FORA up till now with the dissolution. It really has to do with winding up the affairs of FORA. And then we also have a matter scheduled on our Board of Supervisors agenda for the June 23rd. Sorry, because we're running out of time here, and then there's monetary transfers involved that have to be done before June 30th. And so the idea is there that we would authorize our county administrative officer basically to sign the assignment and acceptance if the terms are acceptable to the county.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm glad to know that we have a process in place. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, I'll just add that, as you know, things continue to move quickly, and everybody's working as diligently as possible to bring things in the timely fashion. And I will, again, the county legal team and attorneys at Cag Law have been in close coordination throughout this particular process. So thank you.
Yes, it takes a village to assign a contract. So thanks everyone for all the work on this and great questions. I mean, these are the kinds of details that we don't have to think about as much when it's day-to-day operations, because there'll be another opportunity to, you know, get it right or whatever. And that's not the case now. So a lot of attention to these things. So we do have an action before us to take a second vote on the funds distribution. So Mr. Tregenza, would you call the roll so that we can vote for the vote?
Supervisor Jane Parker.
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams.
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti.
Aye.
Councilmember Lisa Berkeley.
Yes.
Can't hear you.
Pro Tem Gail Martin.
I'm making clear that this is a yes vote on the allocation of funds and not what is appearing on the screen. I am yes. Thank you.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa.
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Chair, I need some clarification. Those recommendations are not included on the bottom? They wasn't there last time?
They were there last time.
Okay, I think the second vote is on the same thing. The first, we voted on first, so I vote aye.
Member John Wizard.
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Great. We will move then to our next item. Actually, Mr. Metz, is there any reason why we couldn't take D and E? There are board members who are needing to leave, and I'd like to get as many votes with as full a complement as possible.
No, those should be rather unanimous, I hope.
And we don't need the vote on the transition plan to go forward with those items, right?
No, you can do those independently.
Great. Let's go ahead then and take up item 7D, and this is the consultant services contract that was being
Right.
discussed a little earlier.
Yeah.
Mr. Metz.
Yeah, so that's laid out pretty plainly in the staff report. It's a contract not to exceed 150,000 that would be made with RGS to provide post-FORA administrative and fiscal services. And the idea is that this would then be transferred to Monterey County to administer up through June 30th of 2021.
Great, thank you. Any questions from board members before I open it up to the public? I don't see any board member hands going up, so I will ask if there is any public comment on this item. Any questions or comments that anyone would like to make regarding this? Okay, I'm not seeing any little blue hands, any regular people's hands. Not seeing any there either, so I'll close public comment. Any board comments, or are we prepared to take action?
I move approval of the recommendation, or accept the recommendation.
I'll second, and I second it.
Thank you. A motion by Gagliotti, a second by Ramers. Any discussion? All right, Mr. Tregenza, would you do the roll call vote for us, please?
Do we lose Mr.
We've lost him. Yep.
Let's see if I can go make sure he's still there. I'll go run out. Hold on one second.
Okay. He probably thought he had time because we were going to talk about the transition plan.
I think
He's coming. He's coming.
I think
There
he
he
might
is.
have a lot of time.
Roll
Yeah,
call
exactly.
vote, please, Harry.
Okay, we're ready for a roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips,
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams,
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti,
Aye.
Councilmember Lisa Berkeley,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Martin,
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye.
Councilmember John Wizard,
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield,
Aye.
and Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Just to be clear
Thank you.
for you, Harry, this was not the transition plan. This was 7D.
Yes, I heard that. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. And we'll take up, with that momentum, we'll take up 7E. This is the agreement between FORA and Monterey County related to that contract. So, Mr. Metz.
Yeah, well, I'll defer to the attorneys here, but generally I can tell you that there's been a lot of coordination and hard work put into this language that would establish a path to for the county to assume certain administrative functions and oversight of the contract with RGS to include the funds for the 3 years of continuation of veteran services through the Monterey County Office of Veterans Affairs and other as described in attachment A. So if you want more detail than that, I would invite Ms. Stremling or Mr. Willoughby to be your best sources of detail.
Okay, let's see if we've got any board member questions. Any board members with questions on this item? And Ms. Strimling, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would add that it also handles the transfer of records from FORA to the county. The county will serve as custodian of records. with the exception of the records that will go to Seaside in its capacity as LRA and also handling ESCA. And in addition, the attorney-client privileged communications and a privileged attorney work product are proposed to go to Kennedy Archer, not the county. We also, through a request from the admin committee, for our admin committee, have said that we will develop a set of procedures so that if member jurisdictions of FORA need access to a FORA record for their business purposes, we'd come up with a procedure where they can get it, as soon as reasonably feasible. So it wouldn't be subject to the Public Records Act because in a way it's your records and we're serving as custodian. But county doesn't have any liability for any past acts or errors or omissions of FORA.
Thank you. That's an important set of distinctions. Any board members with questions at this point? I'll go ahead. Yes, Director Morton.
So to the point about the confidential records, work product, attorney-client privileged documents, and the attorney work product, those going to Kennedy and Archer, I have two questions. After July 1, 2020, who holds the privilege? Who's the client that holds the privilege? I don't believe there will be one. And then secondly is, how are those accessed when someone wants them?
I think, Mr. Willoughby, it might be your turn on this one, or is it Mr. Giffen?
I'll defer to David unless he wants me to go.
I may ask John to step in at the end, but in the case of a natural person, a death does not eliminate an attorney's obligation to preserve the confidentialities of the deceased client. We are approaching FORA as if it was an entity that no longer exists, but its confidences still deserve to be protected. So that is my answer to who's the client question. I don't frankly have a full and complete answer to your second question is, what if somebody wants to see these things? I think we would have to, on a case-by-case basis, look at the request and see if providing information to the requester would somehow violate a confidence. I can see numerous situations in which it would not, in which case, say for example, the city of Marina needed a personnel record relating to a former employee of FORA who became an employee of Marina. I would envision that the firm would provide that information upon request. It looks like Wendy may have a comment to make regarding that as well, but I would defer to John and Wendy from here.
Great. Go ahead, Ms. Strimling.
I just want to make a distinction there. I mean, I agree with everything David said up to the point of the personnel records. We did put a provision, and you'll see it in the agreement that you have, that as to, confidential records, personnel or medical of employees, the county will be the custodian of those and will preserve confidentiality in accordance with law. But, so it is that those are going to be a case-by-case kind of thing. If, let's say, Marina does need a personnel record and you because now you are the employer of that individual, or Seaside, for example, which is picking up some of the employees of FORA as to ESCA, then obviously we'll work with that jurisdiction and make sure that the confidentiality required by law is adhered to. So they'll be interesting case by case. The attorney-client is a little bit different, and those are going to be held not by the county but by Kennedy Archer, because county was not the client, and so then Kennedy Archer will make determinations with respect to the attorney-client and attorney work product.
Yeah, I picked a bad example. I should have said, suppose there's a construction project, and I know with regard to certain specific construction projects, we are already transferring records to Marina and Seaside, Delray Oaks, and perhaps the county as well. But let's say there's an old construction project that's on land that becomes within, or that is within Seaside's jurisdiction, and they want to see some old privileged communications or attorney work product that related to that contract or to that construction contract. We'd look on a case-by-case basis and see whether providing that to what is, I'm going to have to use the dirty word successor, but if it's a successor that needs the information, I envision that we would routinely provide it. If it's someone who is unrelated to the project, we would have to make a more rigorous analysis as to whether we could provide what was asked for without violating the confidences of our no longer existing client.
And I just have a quick follow-up there, is that I understand the person and the deceased. Would this still be applicable if it was a corporation? Would those confidences that the corporation's disbanded, it no longer exists, has that analysis been done? In case someone holds us to that standard, question number one. And then number two, at some point, would this privilege be exhausted and the records would be available upon a public records request?
Well, in brief, we have looked at the corporate context, and the fact that a corporation dissolves does not eliminate the privilege. In some instances, the privilege is passed on to those who receive the corporation's assets upon dissolution. With regard to the permanence of the privilege, certainly attorney work product would remain potentially privileged forever. I frankly have not researched whether there's a durational limit to the attorney-client privilege, but I suspect that it's probably potentially forever in force as well.
So the jurisdictions that may end up with some responsibility or may end up being responsible for defending against an action, or to the extent that our transition plan they're asking us to consider tries to assign obligations to us, these documents that may be relative to that, representations by the firm, communications from your firm to this board would not be accessible to that jurisdiction.
That's a big hypothetical, and
yeah,
I'd say it would be a case-by-case basis.
But I would not assume that they would necessarily be excluded. I mean, as Mr. Giffen pointed out, in each instance, we would have to make a careful examination. And I would expect that unless we can, that if we conclude there would be some violation of confidence there, that we would not want to turn the records over. We did not find that to be the case, that we would routinely provide the records. And of course, in any instance, were there to be a dispute about that, we would obviously comply with whatever direction a court might give us with regard to disclosure or non-disclosure of the records.
I'm looking to be sure that there's a sharing of information between councils. So Marina City Council, our legal counsel, not our city council, our city's attorney, being able to secure information that may be precipitous to why Marina is involved in an action arising out of conduct of FORA. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Director Oglesby, question?
Yeah, I had a similar question. And so how easy would it be for the entities to access that information? And then secondly, would it make your job easier, John, and your company job easier if the board, this FORA board, left some type of a memo saying what we would want you to do with the records? You know, I don't know if that's appropriate, but when you guys say case by case, you know, I want some type of assurances that, you know, Seaside wouldn't be at a disadvantage because we were not able to weigh in on who gets to see those records. So the first question is, you know, is there something we can do to give you directions? And then the second one is, how easy would it be for Seaside to access, the appropriate records? I don't think it's appropriate that we can ask for Marina's or Marina ask for someone else's. So if you can answer those.
I think as to, say, for example, in the REI matter, those records would be, in general, very much available to Seaside. What we're talking about really is a very limited amount of potentially privileged attorney-client, attorney-work product, doctrine protected documents. And we would have to just make an assessment at the time of the request. I don't think any of your, the substance of the dispute would be all the material documents would be not an issue at all in terms of, but Kennedy Archer wouldn't be holding those. I think the county would be holding those.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if any members of the public have any questions or comments on this item. You can raise your hand in the Zoom room using the raise hand function, or you can raise your hand in your video screen, and I'll look to see if I see any. Not seeing any in either place. So I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board for comment and action. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve staff recommendation?
I'll make a motion to approve staff recommendation.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion from Gagliotti, second from Hoffa. Any discussion on the motion? All right, Mr. Tregenza, would you do a roll call vote for us, please?
Supervisor Jane Parker.
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips. Supervisor John Phillips.
We might have lost Supervisor Phillips here.
Probably sleeping.
Yeah, not seeing him.
Okay. Supervisor
on the list.
Supervisor Mary Adams.
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti.
Aye.
Councilmember Lisa Berkeley.
Yes, aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa.
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby.
Aye.
Councilmember John Wizard.
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Phillips is back.
Aye.
Aye.
You caught me doing a pit stop.
Councilmember Garfield told me she'd be leaving the meeting. So, Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. All right, let's go to item 7C, the transition plan update. Who's going to wrestle with that one?
Transition plan update. Okay. Yeah, this is going to be led by your one who I forgot to call out by name in my acknowledgement. Certainly, Miss Kendall Flint has been a tremendous constructive participant and contributor to getting us to the moment, and will remain with you all for the next year. So glad to have Kendall present this item, the proposed amendments to the 2018 transition plan, probably in close collaboration with her colleague David Willoughby, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear some input from Miss Wendy Strimling too along the way, and others. Kendall, are you there? You're sharing your screen. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, sorry, I unmuted. Thanks, Josh. Looking forward to the next year, because if it's as interesting as the last 18 months, I'm sure we're all in for some fun. What we're talking about today, we've come before the board several times, most recently in May, but we were here in March 12th, April 17th, and then on the 22nd, to basically take a look at proposed amendments to the 2018 plan. The reason for the amendments is that as time has marched on, as a board, you've made policy calls and implemented changes that were not reflected in the 2018 plan. And furthermore, there were things that were called out in the plan that never happened. So just to make everybody a little walk down memory lane, we have reviewed this in detail to look at all those type of inconsistencies. So if it called for FORA to do something by a certain day, if they didn't do it. Also, at the time the plan was constructed, I think there was the belief that FORA was going to be extended for another 2 years. There was some additional information about successor agencies and the potential for a habitat conservation plan. So after we presented at all these different meetings, we hope that what we have today incorporates the changes that have been requested by the board. I think the May meeting, the most important change requested related to prevailing wage. But what I'm going to do is walk you through the changes. And then as Josh may have mentioned, David and I have been fielding emails, calls, and collaborations with our partners who have expressed some concerns about language. So even within the last, while you were in closed session, small changes were being made. So I'm first going to walk through the big picture. We're going to walk through the entire document as a whole, and then we'll go back and take individual comments on different sections. First of all, the update, as been discussed before, has removed all references to a potential joint powers authority. As you are reminded during the Habitat Working Group, that is something we vetted, discussed, and it could still happen in the post-FORA universe if you as agencies decide to pursue it, but it is not a requirement or something that is laid out within the plan. It also talks about memorializing the recording of the master resolution in April, and that was requested by the board at its March meeting. It updates funding available for the retirement of the Calpers liability. And where this becomes really important, we actually have two funding sources now for that. One was the 115 trust, that was the set aside. And the second was now captured within our bond documents, so that once the Calpers liability is known, which is expected to be about 90 to 120 days post FORA's sunset, we will pay what we can, actually deplete the 115, which is continuing to earn interest up to this point. And then we will pay the remainder with the funds that are being set aside in the bond. So that debt will be retired in the fall before the end of the 2021 calendar year or fiscal year. And why that's important is this, and I think that's something that Member Morton mentioned a bit ago and has come up a couple times. Any funds that are left over at the county from the set-asides that have been given would be originally used to retire CalPERS debt, but that debt's going to be retired before those funds are entirely expended, right? Because RGS, for example, we would continue to be working through June of 2021, but if we don't use the $150,000 or don't use all of it, there would be funds left over. So in any case, one of the things is that those funds we were suggesting would go back to the bond, because we essentially were borrowing from the bond to pay for the retirement of the CalPERS debt. And then of course, it also memorializes the transfer of funds to LAFCO for future litigation should it arise. It looks at the habitat funds, and again, based on your direction, the various percentages that you allocated to the 5 land use jurisdictions. It also memorializes transfer of capital improvement project funds and responsibility to, as lead agency, to Delray Oaks, Marina, and Seaside. It takes a look at successors to FORA obligations. And this is a newer section from when we last spoke. I expect there to be some exciting discussion about that. But really, this is a response to requests from LAFCO and also requests from others to identify successors where they were, where we could, to make sure that that was laid out. And it also memorializes the nomination of the city of Seaside as the local reuse authority and economic development conveyance successor to FORA. And then finally, we have the $100,000 in funds for Seaside as that LRA EDC successor. The addition of a language related to prevailing wage for all first generation construction as described in the master plan resolution. And then it removes items not completed or implemented by FORA or its member agencies by June 30th, 2020. So I'm going to stop my share for a second to bring up the actual document. Give me just a moment here. So I'm not going to go through in detail the facts in the alphabet because we really didn't have very much in terms of changes or questions on that. However, when I finish going through everything, we can certainly address topics of concern if the board has any. What I'd like to do though is just walk you through piece by piece where we have these various changes. So first of all, base wide facilities in this section, which remains pretty much the same from where it was the last time you saw it. It basically describes the, I'm pulling up the red line at the same time. That the transition plan assigns, as it should, all the liabilities and assets as part of FORA's transition. Section 1.2 did have some changes, and this relates to transition plan assignment of various successor or general plans to the various cities. And that basically, I'm going to have David comment on this a little bit more, but David, perhaps you want to address this one right now while we're here, what was actually changed in this section to be compliant?
Yeah, on the page that is showing in the screen, most of the language that includes the lowercase a, b, c, etc. is relatively new. And that is intended to more explicitly and completely make the assignments of liabilities and designations of successor agencies that are required by the FORA Act. These things were generally addressed in the 2018 plan, but this is more complete and more explicit in terms of its detail in conformity with requests received from LAFCO, among others.
I think the most important thing in this section, David, is really we had some questions about the relationship between MPC and the urban terrain facility. There was an existing agreement, so this basically memorializes what would happen or what is going to happen in the post-FORA world.
That was one of the late arriving comments, or I shouldn't say late arriving, but one of the more recently received comments was specificity about what is going to happen in terms of management responsibility for the properties held by MPC, and that's down about 3/4 of the way through this paragraph.
Okay.
But we had some discussion earlier about the concept of assignments of liabilities and designations of successors, and if we start with near the top of this page, as to incomplete projects initiated by FORA that the land use jurisdictions choose to carry forward, and as to completed projects for which there are any outstanding mitigation measures that remain to be fulfilled or monitored, as well as projects for which there are any environmentally related contractual or judicially imposed liabilities, those all would be designated to go to the responsible successor agency, which in the case of a project that is located within a single jurisdiction would be that jurisdiction. In the event that there is a project that's located within more than one jurisdiction, then the jurisdictions would decide among themselves who would take on the role of lead agency status under CEQA if there were any projects to be moved forward related to that. But that's the material that's new since May.
So moving on, these are much simpler. The reuse master plan and resolution, again, as directed by the board, this basically memorializes the fact that it has been recorded. The environmental services cooperative agreement, no real change here. Transfer of FORA's records, again, not much changing here with the exception of responsibility that designates LAFCO as the responsible agency for any litigation concerning forest compliance or lack of compliance with California Public Records Act. And this is another one of those areas that I expect we're going to have additional conversation about through LAFCO representatives here today. So I'm sure we're going to come back to that. Water and wastewater did not seem to have any issues one way or the other. That's pretty much been the same. That has not changed in material since basically our May meetings. We get here to assets, liabilities, and obligations. The section 1155 trust. What has changed and updated in here is basically adding the county as a signatory so that when this all, once we know what the final amount is, it will allow the county to direct the release of funds to Calpers to fulfill that obligation. We have retirement reserve funds here, which were initially going to be used for Calpers. I do believe this one section, I think this may, you might want to take a look at that again, but we moved that 1,500 into payment of other debt based on the allocations of funding that the board has already voted on. I'm not sure it needs to be removed from the transition plan at this point because it basically says that it's not irrevocably committed. But basically these funds were used to meet other litigation expenses, and then that increased the amount of funds that were taken from the bond initiative. 2.1.3 again, not changed. It's basically reiterating that LAFCO is receiving $500,000 in funding that would be used for litigation should that need arise. Habitat funds, this is a work that came out of the Habitat Working Group, and basically this goes by percentage to the various member agencies. Very glad we did not have the exact numbers in there because even in the last several months, some additional CFD funding has come in, but it would continue to be distributed by the percentages that the board already agreed to in previous meetings. Capital improvement funds, we've talked about this before, and again, you've already approved memorandums between the various agencies that basically the Marina Stockade, repair of stormwater infiltration units, and of course, General Jim Moore Boulevard in Delray Oaks. So in these cases, all three jurisdictions received the remaining capital improvement funds. There are memorandums of agreement in place that establish what they're going to use those funds for. And this further designates that they will overtake CEQA lead agency status and be responsible for those projects. Other funds did not change too much, with the exception of that it would be applied first to the satisfaction or refund of pension liability on Calpers. So that's what I was saying earlier, that we're likely not going to know we'll know the amount of money in the fall of 2020, but there may still be additional funds left over, and then those would be distributed by the county post-distribution. ESCA reimbursement, this is basically memorializing what we already have agreed to, which is basically the potential reimbursable work, which is now going to be conducted by the city of Seaside, which has been approved by the Army to be the successor for this particular project. Miscellaneous personal property would be transferred to the county for sale or disposition in accordance with any applicable rules or policies. So basically, if there's anything left over, we don't anticipate there will be a lot, those would be put up for sale, and any revenue gathered from that would be used to retire the Calpers debt. This is one of those pieces which would be happening sooner rather than later, so we probably see those funds transferring over in the fall. Real property, this again relates back to the city of Seaside, and the piece in here that has not changed but just been memorialized is the $100,000 that is being transferred to the city of Seaside to cover the costs of property transfers in their role as the designated LRA successor. And 2.1.10 also looks at the pollution legal liability policies that will be now transferred over to Seaside. At this point, our unfunded liabilities, we moved to 2.2.1, is somewhere between 7.8 and 9.4-ish million dollars. And at this point, the bond, which I was speaking about, has a set aside of $4 million, coupled with the funds that have already been held in our escrow account, would be enough to retire the debt in full. I think a couple people were asking about whether or not there's any interest or anything that is accruing. There's no interest accruing because we don't have the final number yet from Calpers. And the intention is that once we get that final number, that actually RGS, working with the county and with the city of Marina as the holder of the bond funds, and an actuarial that has actually been brought on through Mark Norcross and company. We'll take a look at that, make sure that the number is in fact accurate. And then once that has been established, the payment in full would be made in the 2020 calendar year. So there would be no existing liability or any type of issues for any of our member jurisdictions. These other sections are the same as they've been actually for quite some time, so I'm not going to go over there, but I will, with a special shout out to Mr. Cheshire. Prevailing wages based on Mr. Hoffa's request and others. This was brought up at the May board meeting, and we were directed to include this information, include this as a requirement of any first generation building that happens on the former Fort Ord. So that has been preserved as part of the transition plan and would be a requirement therefore moving forward. Late discovered items, again, we've made some slight adjustments on this. Naming LAFCO as an oversight, someone with oversight on that. However, up until we get to any kind of a problem, bills and whatnot would still come in and we'd be paid by the county through funds that transferred from FORA to take care of those obligations. We anticipate this being nothing more than, frankly, the occasional phone bills, electric, things like that. We don't anticipate there being more afterwards. This is a new section. This is section 3.1. And this is a table that basically just sets up the remaining obligations and identifies the responsible agency and the assignment of liabilities. So in each one of these cases, we're looking at various projects. In many of these cases, we've kind of already talked about this earlier in terms of the transfer of projects over, for example, the repair of stormwater infiltration units, habitat management sites for Mount Airy Peninsula College, Calpers, all these other pieces. This just relates as a little table to take you back within the plan as to where these things are addressed. And also reiterates again that we have $500,000 in indemnification for legal funds for LAFCO should that come to pass. We hope it will not. In absence, litigation management has not changed. Survivability, there is a memo that was provided by Cag Law to FORA and was distributed to the board members that basically is a statement for what they perceive the survivability of the base reuse plan, master resolution, and FORA agreements would look like. The way we are viewing it at this point is that once FORA has ceased to exist, that the interpretation of that, should someone want to challenge it, would be a legal question for the future and would not be addressed within this particular document. And then of course, you have the right to modify this agreement now or any time during the next 9.5, 10 days that you have remaining in the calendar. These are all then the other signatories. None of this has really changed. So really that wraps it up. I think as Josh might have mentioned to you, we have a vote request on this item today. We'll be asking for obviously comment and discussion. If it goes unanimous today, this would be our last meeting. If it does not, in the tradition of FORA, go unanimous today and we come back next week, we would be again looking at it again. But we'll look for your comments, questions, and be available to answer any questions that you might have for either David, myself, or John.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Flint. So I'm going to start with board member questions, then I'm going to ask for public comment and questions, and then any commentary we can get back to and whatever action we may want to take. So Director Hoffa, if you would go ahead and ask your question, and then I have Director Morton's hand is also up.
Thank you, Board Chair. I'll hold my comments till later, but I do have a question. I just want to confirm with staff that the language included with respect to MPC, is this, as far as you know, does this meet their requests, and are they satisfied with this language?
David, I think you should take that one.
I have not specifically confirmed that MPC is satisfied with the language, but the language was designed to meet their request.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Morton.
So I have a question. Exhibit C is a memorandum that says from Authority Council and written to answer in response to LAFCO. And I wanted to just, it's more of a question, I guess, for LAFCO, is if this unsigned memorandum, which doesn't specify the author beyond Authority Council, is not on letterhead, if that's acceptable to LAFCO, or if they would prefer it be signed and on letterhead and to archive where we got it. Then as to the actual document, the transition plan, in paragraph, what was paragraph M, is that we took action for the FORA CFD to terminate. We're recording something that will terminate the Mello-Roos tax lien. Shouldn't that also be identified and memorialized here as that that's been concluded? That's one question, okay. And then going to paragraph 1.2, where there's a reference about projects and assignment to projects. The City of Marina has a question is what projects? We took a project, we entered into a negotiated contract for that project. We are the lead agency. My question is, what projects is this referring to that is being assigned, in particular to Marina? And I'm trying to know what you're referring to as projects. We don't want this language modifying our negotiated contract. That contract should stand alone, and that's not clear in here. And I probably suspect the other jurisdictions might have similar questions. One of the questions I have on paragraph 2.1.10, insurance policies, where you just said FORA is not to keep any policies of insurance enforced beyond the date of their expiration. Is that the expiration of FORA or the expiration of the policy? It's ambiguous. I don't know why you would have them terminate if the policy extended. And then as to the paragraph 2.1.10, second paragraph, where you indicate about the pollution legal liability policy and restoring premiums in a ratio, can we have that document emailed, sent to all the jurisdictions so we have that in our archives and are not trying to find that through the county should that instance arise? One of the other questions I'm looking for answer is in the building removal and the bond is none of that is mentioned, and should it be?
Which part do you mean, Gail? I'm unclear.
Well, you have building removal and you say it's the responsibility of the organizations. It's paragraph 2.2.5, and it says in the absence of a consolidated building removal program. We did do a consolidated building removal funding program, and we've agreed to what is going to be the allocation of those funds. And we, I think, have agreed and directed that excess funds would backfill for the Calpers, but this document is silent. I haven't seen it in here, any reference to what those agreements are. And if this is to be a document that we all look to as the wrap-up, I'm trying to make sure it's all-inclusive, or at least identifies there's another document to look at. So the objections from the City of Marina have been sent to Kendall and Josh, and I think those were forwarded to council as to modifying our contracts, which we already had negotiated, and that an assignment of projects or contracts that FORA has entered into the City of Marina is not acceptable beyond what we've agreed to. Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff want to respond to some of those, or do you want to take a breath? I see that David Martin from MPC has his hand up. He might have a response to the question about whether the language in here is agreeable to MPC. Shall I go to him, Kendall, or do you want to?
Yeah, well, let me, there's a couple things I want to also defer to David on. I
Sure.
think, and if I understood this correct for Member Morton, I want to go back up to the this bit in the CEQA side of the house. So it seems to me, because I know I did talk about this previously with David, with our counsel, would this section be agreeable or more palatable to the city of Marina, Seaside et al. If the specific projects were called out, like we're talking about the stockade based on the existing MOAs, and there's some reference to those within the document itself. So that it's very clear that that's what we're talking about, because the idea here is not beyond that.
The idea for the city of Marina, yes, we have a contractual obligation wherein we're the lead agency. We have taken over that project. FORA has delegated responsibility. Those contract terms were negotiated between council and are to be enforced against Marina in the future. That's what we've agreed to. We are not agreeing to modify that contract by what's in this transition plan.
And I understand that. Okay, so let me ask about one other question, David. My understanding is this: when we're looking again at the bond, the various agencies, including City of Marina, Seaside, all of you, you have existing agreements that relate specifically to bond proceeds and how those are going to be distributed. The transition plan only relates to the $4 million set aside that would be used for the retirement of Calpers debt. And though we could in this section reference the existing agreement between the parties that says these cities have through another agreement, but it's not specific to the transition plan. It's a separate piece, for example, that not everybody is a signatory of that. It's just those that were getting proceeds. But it seems in that one, if we were to reference the agreement between those agencies, would that satisfy your concern?
Was that
are you asking?
Director Martin?
I'm asking Gail, I'm asking David if that makes sense.
The transition plan only addresses the $4 million part of it. The treatment of the rest of the bonds is left to other documents that really are not directly related to the transition plan. So there is nothing in the transition plan dealing with aspects of the arrangements for use of the bond proceeds other than the discussion of $4 million set aside.
If I may, just to the follow-up of that, there is reference to any unexpended funds going back to backfill for the bond. I'm not asking you to put recitation in this agreement about that there was a bond structure adopted, implemented, in place, and where is that document? Because you're funneling money into it. So it would just be a complete record that we know what we're talking about. You don't need to re-recite terms, you just reference what it is, date and the action.
That makes sense to me. With David's blessing, I would easily make that adjustment.
I don't have any objection to that concept.
So, Madam Chairman, if we can move on to other questions. I'm keeping a running total here of the things that might need to change so we can come back to it as a whole list when we're done.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to recognize David Martin, whose hand was up, but now has gone away, to speak to the MPC position.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Director Hoffa, for the question. The language is acceptable to MPC, and the college is very appreciative of its inclusion in the plan, and thank the county for the partnership.
Great. Thank you. And I will just say that the county is willing to work with MPC, but this is a FORA obligation for Habitat, anyway, we have said that we are willing to work with MPC, but we're not accepting that it's our responsibility. So anyway, it's just a nuance that I'm sure we'll be able to work out based on our, on our relationships. So any other board member with questions on the language in this update to the transition plan? Okay, so I'm going to then go to the public to raise any questions and make any comments that they feel are important. So I'll move, I see that Doug Yount has his hand up and Kate McKenna as well. So Mr. Yount first and then Ms. McKenna.
Thank you, Chair Parker. This is Doug Yount with Marina Community Partners. I just want to bring the board's attention to the couple of minor changes, or not so minor, but important changes that were presented actually by our advising water council to the two sections that are in the transition plan agreement relating to water. It's really important that there be a belt and suspenders and any other supporting devices, a metaphor you can make, relating to water allocations. And it's the reference to the court case there, or judicial precedents cited, is similar to the one that's cited in FORA's council's memo as well. And I think it's very important that that precedents be acknowledged and established in this transition plan agreement. As we know, water is often a contentious issue in this region, and it's very important that there be as many protections as possible put in place relative to those future allocations, which I believe has been the intent of the board all along. And it's the intent in the service agreements. It's the intent in the water service agreements with MCWD. I believe it's the intent and with attachments as well relative to the LRA and ESCA agreements that Seaside has, and it needs to be consistent and codified here as well relative to that's the request, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yount. Ms. McKenna.
She needs to unmute.
Yeah. Kate McKenna, your turn.
Yeah. Right. You hear me? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Good. Thank you. Yes, I'm Kate McKenna, LAFCO Executive Officer. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. We greatly appreciate the important work that your FORA board, staff, council, and consultants have accomplished over the last 6 months. And with respect to the changes that you've are seeing today in this transition plan update, we think that most of the changes are great and definitely help to add some clarity and certainty. We do have some comments on 3 of the sections that pertain to LAFCO. As of Wednesday this week, changes were made that would shift, that would propose to shift some of FORA's responsibilities and liabilities to LAFCO of Monterey County. Today we provided a letter that I believe, I know has been distributed to you, dated June 18th, that outlines our concerns. We are requesting that the FORA board direct that that new language be removed with respect to the provisions pertaining to LAFCO. Specifically, section 1.5 addresses FORA's public records and proposes to assign to LAFCO responsible successor duties for litigation pertaining to all 25 years of your personal records. LAFCO is not in a position and cannot inherit the risks that LAFCO has assumed in complying or not complying with Public Records Act, and we are not in agreement with that proposed language. Second item that we are concerned with is section 2.2.8. And in that section, FORA proposes to assign payment responsibilities for late discovered items that are not tied to real property that would result in a liability to the County of Monterey and to LAFCO. And that section proposes to use the $500,000 in litigation defense funds that were provided per an agreement between LAFCO and FORA. And that agreement provides that those funds are to be used for LAFCO's defense. There is no provision in there that that can be a funding source to satisfy FORA's liabilities and claims. The third area that I would like to call to your attention, please, is section 3.1 relating to successor of all legal, financial, and unresolved matters and all unassigned liabilities. There's this catch-all statement would propose to assign all of those responsibilities to LAFCO. And again, as you have pointed out, there's no legal basis for that, no authority for that. And this is another area where LAFCO cannot accept this language. So in the June 18th letter that you have, we have enclosed at the back of that as an attachment some redlined language, and that the redline language would remove those sections or those provisions of these three sections that LAFCO cannot accept. So we are requesting that your FORA board direct that those changes be made. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Any other, well, let's see. Yeah, I'll go ahead and see if there are any other comments from the public, and then I'll have staff speak to the points that have been raised. Mr. Cheshire.
Yes, Ron Cheshire speaking on behalf of the Monterey Santa Cruz Building Construction Trades Council. We wish to thank the board and such for 2.2.7, the wage requirement. This goes back to 1993, the conference regionally, which brought together businesses, contractors, professionals, architects, engineers, labor unions, just contractors and stuff that wanted to ensure a level playing field in the area, and that they would be able to compete and have if they had the opportunity to compete with outside entities which came from areas with, let's say, a lesser cost of living than ours. I also want to note on behalf of the building trades that we continue to be slightly frustrated in regards to the issue over the IAs. It's very political, and we understand that the jurisdictions do not want to be held accountable or responsible for provisions that FORA has had implemented. But there is nothing in this agreement which ensures that implementation agreements which were signed by the jurisdictions and recorded will ever be carried over. No one wants to be responsible for them. The jurisdictions on one hand say they don't want to accept responsibility or the obligation. On the other hand, the position that LAFCO's taken is they're not willing to assign. And it leaves this in limbo. And our main concern over this is that it's going to lead to endless litigation. All the time, all the effort that we spent as a community coming up with a plan for the reuse of this base is being put in jeopardy. And we would hope that those that do not want to accept the responsibility and those who are not willing to impose the responsibility will ultimately come to terms with the fact that these IAs are significant and important and need to be recognized and maintained. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cheshire. Ms. Strimling, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Let's see, I'll turn on my video. Oh, not getting my video to go on. There it is. First of all, I just want to appreciate all the hard work of the FORA staff and council in, doing some very good revisions compared to last week, and incorporating many of the county's comments. I have one question about 2.1.6, and I apologize for bringing up this question now, but I think it wasn't until I heard the discussion that I began to understand what the intention was, which I don't think is necessarily reflected in this language. Because as I understand it, when FORA closes out its books, there's going to be a transfer of funds to the county to pay the various expenses of FORA, as well as it's referenced in the section that LAFCO pointed out that, if there's other monies, it may go to those liabilities. And so I'm not really understanding the reference to Calpers here, liability, which is actually handled by the bond. And so the question is, if the intention is, if there's money left over after everything, then it's going to backfill and go back to the bond trustee or some concept like that. That's not stated in 2.1.6. So I find that language a bit confusing. And I guess I would look just for some clarification about what, to have the language clarified so it states the intent better and also recognizes that the initial use of sort of whatever leftover dribs and drabs are in the accounts of FORA are going to be used for FORA's obligations first, other than CalPERS, because CalPERS is taken care of through the bond plus section 115.
If I may address that, Wendy, you're absolutely right.
Actually, Kendall, let's wait, if you don't mind, just making notes of these, and then we'll, I want to get through the public comment, and then we'll, there's quite a bit to respond to from LAFCO as well, so just want to get it all out there, and then we can go through it. Thanks. Sherry Damon, your hand is up. You're next.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I have a couple of comments. One is I echo Councilmember Morton's comment about our existing agreements. I think in terms of the habitat section, the percentages are listed out, but I do think that it should reference as well the agreements that the jurisdictions have signed off on as the operative document. In section 2.1.7, the ESCA reimbursement paragraph, this is no longer accurate. The Army has approved the ESCA, the assignment of the ESCA, and so any funds that FORA holds should be subject to the assignment provisions in that contract document. And I think there's some overlap in what FORA currently holds. And those are my basic comments, is to tie it back to the existing agreements that we've worked very hard to actually implement this board's wrapping up of obligations through those agreements. for the most part. And I think this document should reference that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other members of the public with comments or questions on this updated transition plan? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going up, so I will turn it back to staff and attorneys to sort through the different questions and concerns and any proposed adjustments that might be made.
Madam Chairman, I'm going to suggest the other things that were mentioned, I think are pretty easily fixed or adjusted, but I think that we do need to get some comments from David, specifically regarding the sections that were included about LAFCO. And perhaps David can explain that a little bit more, and then we can get some feedback from the board about how they'd like to proceed on that, if we want to leave it as it is or make some sort of a change. David?
Well, basically, the FORA Act requires that there be, or that the transition plan include assignments of liabilities, designation of successor entities, schedule of remaining obligations. And we have, over the course of many months, received repeated requests from LAFCO, among others, that those be made with a greater degree of specificity than was contained in the 2018 agreement. So based on a desire to make the provisions more specific and understandable, we drafted the language that has recently been added to the proposed transition plan updates. I understand that with regard to LAFCO, they are not happy about assuming responsibility or being designated as a successor, and they do not have the funds to deal with that. It's a hardship upon them to have that occur, but that is an artifice of the poorly drafted legislation that is the dissolution provisions of the FORA Act. It is not very clear about what happens. It doesn't provide much detail. FORA staff and LAFCO staff have a disagreement about the extent of LAFCO's powers under the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act and the potential applicability of that act to the dissolution of FORA. But at the bottom line, the FORA Act calls for FORA to make those designations. LAFCO is the only entity to which we have, or which FORA has provided any litigation funds. And to us, it seemed to be that they were the most logical designee, assignee, successor responsible agency to deal with the kind of catch-all categories of litigation. As I said, I understand and sympathize with their position, but if not LAFCO, then who? I doubt that any of the member agencies will willingly accept the assignments and designations that are in the current proposal pegged to LAFCO. So the choice seems to be designate or assign to somebody, or don't and leave a gap. And arguably that is not fulfilling the mandate of the FORA Act, that all liabilities be assigned and that successors for all future issues be designated.
Mr. Willoughby, could I ask a question? I'm puzzled, and clearly I'm not a lawyer. Why would anyone be liable for FORA's Public Records Act non-compliance prior to FORA's sunset? That's like, it's sort of like trying to come after FORA for a debt when FORA doesn't have any money, it doesn't exist. Why would past Public Records Act problems be the responsibility of anyone?
Well, we do have a pending piece of litigation that asserts that FORA violated the Public Records Act, and that provision is there principally because of that pending litigation. Somebody needs to be the successor to deal with that litigation. FORA can't, because FORA won't exist. And again, the logic behind the wording that's in the current proposal is LAFCO was given $500,000 in litigation reserve funds. Nobody else was. So if anybody has to deal with this litigation that may or may not be settled before FORA goes out of existence, it should be LAFCO.
Okay, I see a couple of directors. So I guess before I go to directors' questions, did I understand, Ms. Flint, that you said that the issues raised by others were fairly easily addressed, Marina and the county, that there's not really much of an issue there, the LAFCO?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. Certainly, I think that what I heard from the other board members and members of the staff and from the various agencies, they like to see connection of this document to other existing agreements and documents, so those can be cross-referenced, even though they're not part of the agreement, but just to, much the way we were saying we're doing with the water sections, which basically say, as also referenced in X, Y, and Z, and I think we could do that relatively easily. The thing that Ms. Strimling brought up, though, which I think is something we do need to have some board input on, and I do think we should beef up the language, and that's this, that the board has had policy for several months now that any unexpended funds left over would initially be used for Calpers liability. But as you know, as we've been negotiating these payments for litigation and other things, what wound up happening was that the bond documents were revised to do a set aside of that $4 million. So staff's feeling is that if there's any money at all left over from what is not expended by FORA, that those remaining funds should probably go back to building removal, because the bond was already tapped for $4 million to offset that. But I think, to the Stremling's point, that's not especially clear in 2.1.6, but it would be an easy add to say that, once all Calpers and all other obligations are met, the remaining funds will be returned for building removal. The board's already established what the distribution of those funds would be, if any, so there's not really a need to get further along in that. But I think it goes to another one of those issues, which is cross-referencing to another document, which we can do.
Okay, great, thank you. I see that, let's see, Director Morton has her hand up. I saw that Director Adams had her hand up. Although I see too that Mr. Willoughby has his hand up, maybe I should have you speak, if you're going to speak directly to this point we were just discussing.
I'll try and make it brief. And 2.1.6 certainly can benefit from some rewording to become more clear. But the concept, at least as I understand it, is that the Calpers liability is not going to be known for another 3 or 4 months. The idea was that money that's available, the kind of loose change left over in FORA's accounts, and the additional money that may come in after July 1, but before FORA's books are fully closed, would be used to pay the kind of small change liabilities that come in, the final phone bill, maybe the power bill. The idea was not to delay the payment of any of those things until the Calpers contract liability was determined, but rather some of this language came out of an abundance of caution, thinking that theoretically there could be a possibility that the money in the 115 trust, when combined with the $4 million from the bond set aside, might not be enough to cover everything owed to Calpers. And I understand that is a remote possibility, and maybe it isn't even a realistic possibility. As things look now, those 2 funding sources should be enough to fully discharge the obligation. But just in case, the idea was, if those 2 funds combined didn't completely wipe out the FORA or the Calpers liability, then we would next look to monies that the county was holding, at the time we were paying off the Calpers liability 4 months after FORA's sunset. If there was anything left in there, that too would be used first to wipe out the Calpers debt before it was applied to anything else. And maybe the possibility of that situation occurring is so remote or unlikely that it's just too confusing to mention it. And maybe we clean it up by taking that language out and just relying on our firm understanding that the money in 115, when combined with the 4 million bond set aside, is going to be enough to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Director Morton, and I do just want to note that Kate McKenna has her hand up, and it's unusual to go back to a member of the public, but I think LAFCO is kind of a partner in this document, and so I'm going to allow her to speak again.
Very much so.
After Director Morton.
Thank you, Chair, and I think that's appropriate. One of the key things listening to Ms. McKenna is that she's challenging how we as a FORA board have the authority to make assignments under this transition plan. And I certainly agree, as Chair Parker pointed out, that there is no assignability of past acts, responsibility, liability for an agency's past acts to somebody else, be it LAFCO, be it Marina, be it Seaside. And that's part of what the problem that in reading this is, we're assigning assets and obligations, and you talk about projects, and other than the contractual projects, South Boundary Road with Delray Oaks, Seaside's project, our project, the county has taken on particular projects, there are no projects. So it's very ambiguous and confusing. What I think that we as a board and Mr. Willoughby, with regard to what you're articulating to us, is a very different principle. And the principle that you're articulating to us is that FORA in this transition plan is assigning to LAFCO the responsibilities set forth in a legislative act. We're not trying to go any further or we're not doing anything more than what 67700 of the government code states. And I think where we get into trouble is when we start articulating like the Public Records Act and past acts of this agency cannot be assigned to LAFCO. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Ms. McKenna, please go ahead and speak. Kate McKenna, are you there? There you are.
Okay, all right, sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
I just need to go on record as LAFCO's representative here to strongly disagree with Mr. Willoughby's assertions, with all due respect to him. We object to the proposed language that has been inserted in this document this week without our knowledge, without our consultation. We just noticed it on your FORA board website Wednesday morning. And there is no legal basis and no authority for FORA to assign these matters to us. And also it is inconsistent with the indemnification agreement signed by FORA and LAFCO last December. So our commission will be holding a public hearing on Monday afternoon, June 22nd, to consider a resolution making determinations about the transition planning process and that FORA has gone through over the last couple of years. And we will be indicating in that resolution a complete rejection of these 3 sections that adversely and improperly involve LAFCO. We do believe there is a solution, and it's tied very closely to other provisions that are in the transition plan right now. Right now, that plan says that with respect to problems that are discovered pertaining to real property, that the underlying jurisdiction or jurisdictions would be responsible for addressing them. We are proposing that the language also reference that non-real property problems, liabilities, claims be directed to the underlying jurisdiction or jurisdictions most appropriately responsible for those matters. We think that's a very simple, easy fix that, together with removing the language that references LAFCO adversely, would resolve this matter. And we would like to be able to, I, as the executive officer, would really like to be able to go into this public hearing on Monday with my commission, saying that we have, that the transition plan is fine, and that we've come to terms and resolved this very important matter. So thank you for allowing me to speak once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Gagliotti and then Director Oglesby.
So I have can you hear me? I have a calendaring question. If we send this back for another revision, then we don't have two votes. We don't have two dates in order to vote, because it's almost assured that there'll be someone that won't agree with this and then vote against it. So it's either we bring this thing to a vote today and then likely have a second vote next Friday, and then that's it. Is that my understanding? Is that correct, Josh?
Currently, we have a, well, the first thing is, if you pass it unanimously today, no more meetings. If you want to get together again, then we have something on the books for next, tentatively for next Friday. And we could, you know, we have some days in there. If you want to schedule another get together, we could do it before or after that Friday to accommodate what folks.
I mean, in my short 18 months on this board, I don't have any faith that will come to any kind of resolution. I still think we're going to need two votes regardless, and I just don't know what more tweaking this document we could do to expedite that. I mean, I really kind of think this is our last chance right now. We either bring this to a vote or we don't do it.
Thank you. Director Oglesby.
Thank the chair. We are running out of time. And I think Mr. Willoughby said it exactly. He said no other entity wants to take that responsibility. So he wrote in there that LAFCO should accept it. And LAFCO said we don't have the authority to ask them to accept it, and we don't have the authority to make them accept it. And I agree with that. The only question before us now is strike out what LAFCO say strike out and move forward. We do not have the authority to assign anybody anything. So, you know, we don't need to meet again. I would love to meet with you guys again so we can say goodbye properly. But my point is about this LAFCO thing, we don't need to vote to assign it to LAFCO when they're saying that they don't want it, right? So we just strike the language out. But I'm admitting, I understand where it came from, but that doesn't mean we have to adopt it. And that doesn't mean we have to act like we can't strike it out, move the rest of the document forward, and either make this the last meeting and come back for something else. But to try to keep this in there when LAFCO is saying they don't want it, it doesn't make sense. And I don't think we have the votes anyway. I think we should just go, you know, excuse me, Chair, but I think we should just go and ask people, you know, how many people want to keep it in there. And then we'll see if the votes are there to pass it. But to have to come back and vote again on this after LAFCO's Monday meeting doesn't make a lot of sense. We know we can't make them accept it like any other entity. So on the same frame where LAFCO doesn't want to accept the responsibility, other entities don't want to accept it, and we should stop trying to make people take these things when we know we don't have the power to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hoffa and then Director Gagliotti.
So I'm feeling a little bit of the time imperative that Mr. Gagliotti spoke about. And I think we're very close here. We have a very good document. I do want to follow up with Mr. Willoughby a few questions about LAFCO's claims and what they're saying. So Director Oglesby said we don't have the authority to assign these responsibilities. So number one, I think you cited the FORA Dissolution Act that says we do have that authority. So I just wanted to, I got three questions. That's the first one. Do we have authority to make these assignments? Two, the director of LAFCO indicated they're going to be approving some sort of resolution. What would be the legal effect of that resolution on FORA and on our transition document? And then three, if we omit those sections and assign them to no one, which seems to be not what LAFCO wanted us to do. They wanted us to be more explicit in making assignments. But if we now agree to their changed position and we don't assign it, what would be the legal risk to FORA or its various successors? So those are the three questions. Can we do it? What's going to happen if they do what they're threatening to do? And if we don't assign it, what's the risk there? Thank you.
Well, these are, again, artifices of poorly drafted state legislation that left a lot of gaps in guiding the dissolution process for FORA. Your first question, do we have the authority to do it? The statute says you are required to do it. Now, that act may be utterly ineffective. And I understand and, in fact, pretty much agree with the proposition that absent some legislative statutory authority to do so, you ordinarily cannot assign a contract or an obligation to someone who's unwilling to take it. LAFCO and FORA staffs have some disagreement about available authority to LAFCO to actually impose assignments, but LAFCO has, ever since the beginning, indicated that they feel that they do not have the authority to force someone to accept an assignment. And we have not directly contested that, although we hold a possibly different interpretation of the law. But getting back to my point, the statute calls for you to do it. Whether it's effective once you've done it is a different question. I'm not sure I recall your points in order, but I think you mentioned the hearing that LAFCO will be having and what the import of that is. Actually, if you look at Section 67-700, the provisions dealing with the transition plan and the dissolution of FORA, they provide that the transition plan is approved by a majority vote of the FORA board. There is nothing in that statute that gives LAFCO any authority to approve it, reject it, require that it be amended. So although they may hold a hearing and create a record of their criticisms of the plan, from my point of view, it's a legal nullity. It doesn't force FORA to do anything. And then I think your final question is, what if we just remove the references to LAFCO and kind of leave gaps in the assignments of liabilities and successors? As I understood the points that were being made verbally at today's meeting, LAFCO would prefer that there be a designation to the jurisdiction in which the land is involved, which is already in there, and as to non-land related matters, it would go to the jurisdiction most naturally involved or something. Effectively, I think that means that every single member jurisdiction is potentially on the hook. And if we were to use our Public Records Act example, and I appreciate Director Morton's comments on that, but the fact of the matter is, if somebody were to bring an action over a past violation by FORA of the Public Records Act, and that litigation resulted in a judgment, somebody would have to pay it. FORA won't be around there to pay that obligation. So that's what calls for someone to both be assigned responsibility to deal with and defend that litigation, and then ultimately to bear responsibility for payment of it. To me, it's not a logical arrangement, but that appears to be what the statute requires.
Thank you, Mr. Willoughby. So I see other people have their hands up, so I'm going to defer, but I would be comfortable making a motion soon to approve this. The one thing that I still have a question about is, Kendall Flint, are we able to amend the sections that Gail Morton brought up? Is that something we can do here now?
I think what we could do, I've got to ask David if obviously it's going to take me more time than a couple of minutes to pull up all the references, but what I got was the idea that they wanted to reference all the other documents. So I'm not sure how that would work, David, if there could be a motion to approve with the inclusion of references to all of the MOAs, bond documents, and all other documents that related to related to items within the transition plan.
My preference would be that the exact wording of the plan be established when it's voted on. And I'm worried that the number and specificity of some of these suggestions are more than we could handle in just kind of a generic direction to staff to go make some changes. You know, as unsavory as the prospect might be, maybe the thing to do is schedule a special meeting before Friday, come back with an adjusted set of proposals that can incorporate references to other documents, clarify the provision on the flow of the loose change money between FORA's sunset and the closing of its books, and handling some of these other matters. You know, I don't want to have any more meetings.
I agree with you, David. I think it'd be preferable to come back, and I know everybody wants to not come back, but at some point we have to do our farewell video for FORA, right? So I don't know. I'm with David. I think that if you give staff an opportunity to make those changes, I can reach out individually to Gail and Ms. Damon and see if there's a specific, you know, make sure we get it right, with the idea being that based on what I'm hearing today, if we do come back, that we have it down. I think the only thing I'd be looking for today is guidance from the board on its preference regarding the LAFCO sections, whether we need to keep them in or move them out. And since even with that, we might have a second vote, I would suggest either we agendize a meeting for next week, midweek, or go with Friday, and then what the heck, have a final on the 30th to give FORA the send off that it deserves.
And I might also mention, with respect to Director Morton's concerns, and I freely concede it wouldn't make me completely comfortable, but LAFCO has, I believe, taken the position that an assignment made to an unwilling assignee is not enforceable. And to the extent that the transition plan involves references to programs or obligations that are to be transferred to or assigned to, or for which the city of Marina is designated as a responsible successor agency, yeah, if you also believe that such an assignment is unenforceable, you know, then perhaps you don't worry about what the transition plan says. On the other hand, it's the board's pleasure to craft the plan it desires. And if that plan does fall short of meeting every single aspect of what Government Code Section 6770 requires, who's going to be around to be sued over it? Certainly won't be FORA. So just some thoughts. I mean, the statute seems to call for you to do something that it is highly questionable will be enforceable if you do it. So take that into consideration as you're mulling these things over.
Thank you. Let's see. Director Gagliotti is next, and then Director Adams, Hoffa, and Morton.
So, I mean, taking all of that into consideration, I mean, what we need is we need another 2 years, right? I just don't know. I mean, we kind of just have to have, we're there. I mean, I think we're like at 85%. I would actually, I'll go this far. I would make a motion to accept the plan as it is with none of the changes that have been asked for, and just take a poll of the board and see where we're at. And so if someone will second it, then let's take the vote. Otherwise, then we would go to the plan B would be to do the special meeting sometime next week and with all those revisions, and then try to get another second vote. So I make a motion to accept the transition plan as presented to us with no edits.
I'd like to ask my questions before we make a motion on anything.
Okay, so so far there's not a second, so.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that answers the question.
Director Adams.
Thank you. I don't know, my question is this. I worry very much personally. Are we responsible? Do we have directors and officers insurance that protects us as board members from being sued if there is no FORA? And there are plenty of people out there who are litigious. Are we protected? Does FORA have D&O insurance that extends beyond the life of the party? And if not, would the entities that we represent, Monterey County as an example, be liable for lawsuits that could be coming forward? And indeed, would the county protect us as individual board members? So I don't know.
As to the insurance question, I'd have to defer to Josh, but my assumption is no, that you don't have insurance that would extend beyond the life of FORA. As to whether the municipalities or the county would indemnify the representatives on this board, that's a question that would have to be taken up with each jurisdiction. I assume that you would all be covered by governmental immunity for taking discretionary acts in this thing, but having immunity does not mean that you aren't at least sued in the first place and then have to assert the immunity and get back out. So that's not a complete solution for the dilemma either.
Thank you. Anything else, Director Adams?
No, not now, not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Director Hoffa, and then Director Morton.
So I'm going to try a motion. I would move that we direct staff to schedule a special meeting next week, that they work with Marina and Seaside to try to amend the document as requested to include the references, but that the rest of the document be presented to us at that subsequent meeting as is. And I think it's important we leave the LAFCO assignments, because you heard at the end Mr. Willoughby say if we don't assign that one, which we're required to do by the Dissolution Act, but if we don't assign it, then all of the jurisdictions could potentially be liable should a request, should somebody litigate one of those non-real estate issues. So I think it's very important. So that's my motion.
I'll second that.
I will second it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion from Director Hoffa, seconded by Director Gagliotti and various others. Director Morton, you're next, and then Director Oglesby.
So the assignment of trying to assign responsibility for past acts, to that extent that we're trying to shift that to LAFCO, I can't agree and support that. I think that we're only able to make the assignments that are allowed under the statutory scheme, but not for past acts. I might just think about if you apply that logic and there's a tortious act or something else, how could we assign that to LAFCO? I just don't think that's true. If you have abuse of discretion by the board, you can't assign responsibility for that to LAFCO. But the question is, I agree, David, and I appreciate that you're correct, that the city of Marina does not believe that you can assign an obligation to us that we don't accept. But what I'm also advocating for Seaside, for Marina, for the county, for the other land use jurisdictions is we don't want that this document puts us in the place of having to pay for a defense because FORA's transition plan says, oh, we assign you all obligations, all projects. We don't have any idea what they are, but we're going to assign them to you. And then the cities or the jurisdictions have to pay for the defense to get to a legal conclusion that it's not enforceable. First of all, it's not even identified. That's one of the reasons why I'm trying to make sure that the projects, what this document needs to be clear about is the projects that FORA had and the obligations of those projects, we successfully assigned them. Your office, David, with every jurisdiction, went out there, hammered out these agreements, and got it done. And you got the habitat management responsibility assigned, and that's done. To keep into play this concept that there's a nebulous obligation or project is not benefiting any of us. And that's where I'm trying to get that out and get just the memorialization that FORA had these projects, these obligations. Here's the contract. It was dated May 18, 2020, and Marina took that. This contract went to Seaside. Seaside took ESCA. And one of the changes that I wanted was that it goes in there, Ms. Damons also pointed that out, past acts. We've already gotten the Army approval for that. It is completed and done. We should be congratulating ourselves on what we've accomplished since December 2018 is that we have fulfilled the responsibility of making the assignment of obligations and not perpetuating a myth that FORA owes the world something. We did our best. We fulfilled the functions that we were required to fulfill. This agency could have terminated sooner if we had completed 80%, and there wasn't any provision in the legislation that said, oh, and by the way, you need to make sure that you take care of yourself after death and make sure that everybody in the future still does ABC and you have the authority to pass that on. So I'm trying to have a different voice in our heads about what this document is. It is basically a summary of how you've transitioned and that you're done. The other question that I had when you said there's liability and somebody has to pay for it, I go again to if there's no funds in the FORA pot to pay for ongoing liabilities, I truly, and especially as to a public records request, that if the FORA staff didn't do a records retention policy until 2012, and they should have done it in 2006, I can't see how we can say, LAFCO, you have to defend against that. No, you don't have any of the staff members available to you. No, they were not under your authority to direct, and that you're supposed to create a defense. That is an impossible burden to shift to another public agency. And I'm trying to have us put on that lens and really just have this document memorialized that we have done what we're responsible to do. We've spent every single dime and we're done. So I look forward to this. I'm supporting the motion that it comes back. I think it does need to come back, but I really think we need to make considerations of what we think we're assigning to the world, including LAFCO. Thank you.
I might point out that if, for example, this Public Records Act case or another one or something that wholly unrelated to real property comes along, I have no confidence that the lack of funds in FORA's accounts is going to be an effective defense. I'm worried that a plaintiff will look at the FORA Act and say, all liabilities were supposed to be assigned. And I can't see in the transition plan where assignment for past acts or the responsibility to respond with by paying money damages for past acts has been assigned to anybody. So that the practical effect of that could be that every member jurisdiction is on the hook for it. Now, you know, the odds of something like that coming up are probably remote. Personally, I don't think much of the Public Records Act case that's on file against FORA now. I think it's meritless, but again, somebody's got to defend it, even if it's meritless, at least until the point you can get out of it. And if those kind of responsibilities aren't covered by the assignments and delegations made in the transition plan, then at least the possibility that member jurisdictions will be called on the carpet for it exists. You know, however, you know, the transition plan and each and every element is something that is approved or disapproved solely by the FORA board. And if the FORA board doesn't want to make or purport to make assignments that really are highly questionable as to whether they would be effective, you can choose not to make the assignments. You know, just my job is just to inform you of the risk. My job is not to make the decision. That is clearly the decision exclusively of the FORA board.
Thank you. Director Oglesby.
I want to say, David, you're doing an excellent job. You are representing the FORA board, and I see that. And I see that. It's just some of us agree with with our decision. But I want to assure you, I think I can see exactly what you're saying. As FORA board member and as our representative, you're saying we're more protected if we keep LAFCO in there. I understand that. I'm not gonna support the motion, but I want to tell the board before you guys vote, if it goes down and it has to be a second vote at our next meeting to take LAFCO out, that'll be a new vote that may not pass, that would take a second vote. And I think John, am I right on that one? Mr. Griffin?
Can you, I think you're right, but I want to make sure I understand it.
Okay, if we vote with LAFCO in for this first vote and it doesn't pass, it'll be a second vote at our next special meeting. And if it doesn't pass there.
If it doesn't pass today, there's not a second vote.
Right, okay, yeah, I thought.
But
okay.
if it passes less than unanimously and you make a change before you bring it up for the second vote, it's really a first vote on the changed plan. That was kind of the idea behind the special meeting, is that we might take a bit of a breather to try and add in the sections that some of the board members have felt are important to make this kind of a complete self-contained document, make some of the adjustments that the county suggested with regard to clarifying how the flow of cash works, you know, perhaps, you know, taking guidance from the board today on what to do with the LAFCO provisions, coming back with a yet further updated version to introduce at that special meeting, and kind of on the assumption that won't get you a unanimous vote, still have Friday the 26th to do the second vote on the revised, improved plan that you haven't yet seen.
Madam Chairman, I think Janet's trying to get your attention.
Yes, I see that, but I also see that directors Hoffa, Gagliotti, and Morton have their hands up in the blue, and I don't know where Director Ramers comes in the sequence. But since she hasn't spoken yet on this item, why don't we go ahead and hear from her?
Okay, I thought I had my, thank you, Chairman. I thought I had my hand raised on the little technology here. We've spent so much time on this, and we have spent so many hours and special meetings that 2 more meetings really won't do us in. And we really should get it right. And I've been a listener bee in this whole thing, since I'm not a jurisdiction that is going to be handling any of the property. But I do, and what I've been hearing is that the verbiage is extremely important to the jurisdictions. They want to know exactly what is going to be expected of them and what they're going to be agreeing to and what this transition plan will tell them until all of us is going to go forward. So I'm very much in favor of Mr. Willoughby's suggestion that we have, that they have an opportunity to meet with the jurisdictions to understand the language that they want to put in the agreement. I'm in favor at this point too of leaving LAFCO in, given the fact that it was a poorly written direction, but it's a direction that we're having to live with as far as the direction for closing down FORA. And again, if I would point out, if we had been given a little more time, we could have done this in a transition, which I did speak to many months ago. A transition is a process, and we just had to speed up the process, and that's why we're where we are today. And we're getting there, but I'm just going to suggest that we follow the direction of having an extra meeting to hear and see what exactly the staff and the jurisdictions want in the change they're suggesting, and we have the vote that day, and we come back if we need to for a second vote. So I enjoy seeing all of you. I don't know what I'm going to do with my Friday afternoons now. Thank you.
Jan, was that a motion?
I believe there's a motion on the floor already. Is there? I could do a substitute motion.
So what the articulation of substitute motion? Go ahead.
My substitute motion will be that we ask the jurisdictions that have corrections or adjustments in the document to meet with the Willoughby and the others who are writing and prepare the document for review for the FORA board at a date certain soon, and that we be prepared to meet a second time. It would mean that the LAFCO would stay in at this juncture.
Can I just offer some Wednesday or Thursday of next week as possible dates so that we could keep the Friday?
Okay, well, let's worry about that when we get our motion figured out here. So there's been a motion made by Director Ramers. Does someone want to second it?
I'll second it.
Okay, Phillips to second it. So we have a substitute motion on the floor, and I realize, Director Oglesby, were you maybe not finished with your comments or questions? I went to Director Ramers, but it sounded like maybe you had something more to say.
No, I wasn't done, but I appreciate you looking out for me, Chair.
Yeah, well, I'm giving you an opportunity to complete whatever your comments were, or to ask a follow-up question.
No, I'm good. I'm listening to you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Director Hoffa and then Director Morton.
Well, the substitute motion sounds essentially the same. I'm not really sure what the difference is, but maybe I'll let somebody else explain that in a second. I did want to speak to something Director Oglesby brought up, which is in the original motion, I explicitly wanted to include the language about LAFCO for the precise reason he mentioned, which is staff need to know now, do we want to include that or don't we? So if this motion passes, but with less than a majority, right, it's still a clear indication that a majority next week are going to vote to include that language so that you'll be able to get to the end with an approved transition plan at the second meeting next week. So the substitute motion, my motion, whatever, they need to include something specific about LAFCO so that we have clear direction of where a majority of the board are going forward. And I'll just end by saying again, I think we pay Mr. Willoughby to give us his best legal advice. And I think that although we set policy, it's important to listen to him on this particular point.
Thank you. Director Morton?
So I wanted to make a substitute motion. Ms. Reimer's motion was fine all the way except to the absolute acceptance of the language as written to LAFCO. And LAFCO is having its public hearing on Monday, and I think LAFCO should be able to put in any suggested modifications that they want to for the board consideration. And if, in fact, those paragraphs need to stand as is after whatever input it is, it would seem to me that we could have the two alternatives in front of us as for our vote on the first of the two meetings. And I would prefer the meetings not be Thursday, Friday, that they be Tuesday, if you want to stick to the Friday, that we have some time in there. Thank you.
As a point of order, Chair, I think there is a substitute motion, and I don't believe it's permitted to add another substitute onto a substitute.
Right. I was just going to ask from a procedural standpoint, the challenge is that I think Director Reimer's substitute motion was actually the same as the original motion. So I guess what do we do now? Because the motion that Director Morton has just made is different from either of them.
I can remove my motion. I think that would be.
You can withdraw your.
I can withdraw
your
motion.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. And because I think
if the second agrees to withdraw the motion.
Yeah, if we can just get it resolved, because I got about 5 minutes before I got to leave here. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So okay. So the original motion was to come back with the changes suggested by the jurisdictions, but leave the LAFCO language in. Now the substitute motion is to essentially work with LAFCO. I have to say, I'm a little concerned that we just dumped some stuff on LAFCO. We've been working with everybody else, and somehow we think we can just lay something on LAFCO. So I'm interested in the possibility of having one with the LAFCO, the language that LAFCO objects to, have that come, but also work with LAFCO. I think this is what you asked, Director Morton, was that there be another version where we've worked with LAFCO to possibly come up with a different way of approaching those issues.
Yes, and having both matters available for our review at the same exact meeting.
Yes.
And so are you seconding my substitute motion?
If you're looking at me, yes.
Okay, so we have a substitute motion by Morton, seconded by Adams, and Director Adams has her hand up next.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I guess my question is this: can we, as this board at this meeting, pass non-unanimously one that has LAFCO in, and then pass one non-unanimously that has LAFCO out, so that when we come back next week, we can take a second vote on both of them after LAFCO's board has the opportunity to weigh in, and after LAFCO has the opportunity to work with us.
I think what
and Marina.
I think what Director Morton was trying to do is to not make us have to go through that, but rather to have her motion be come back next week on whatever day we decide with a version that makes the changes that the jurisdictions asked for, that clarification and the reference documents and all of that, with the LAFCO language in as it currently is, bring that, and also bring a version that has the jurisdictional changes, the cross-referencing and all of that, and has adjustment to the LAFCO language, having gotten some input from LAFCO.
That's exactly what I seconded.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mary.
I think that's where we are. Anything else?
Another question.
Yeah.
Great.
I was
So,
just-
Chair, I just wanted to confirm, is that, as you stated, what the motion was? Because that's not actually how I heard it. I heard that there was Mr. Hoffa's that with the LAFCO language in, and then I heard Director Morton's without. And that was the only two distinctions between the two motions, as I understood it.
I believe that is not accurate, but let me ask the maker of the motion. Director Morton,
Perfect.
what is your motion?
My motion is to have the document come back with the modifications worked out through the jurisdictions in it, and in one version with the LAFCO provisions as written, and a second version with the adjustments being made in accommodating the jurisdictions, and the LAFCO language being modified either because of input from LAFCO or further input from Mr. Willoughby that it can be changed. Have us be able to choose at that hearing which of that is applicable. If one passes, the other one doesn't get voted on. There are alternatives in one motion, in one packet.
Thank you.
But then it's a, so how do we then put the agenda items? I mean, if say one passes, if one fail, well, they could both fail in that case.
Who knows? So the question is whether you want to have a choice next time with two different documents that you can actually read and know what they say, or do you want to have a document that might not pass and then you don't know what the alternative is and we'd have to meet again and again. So I don't know. So I think the staff can figure out how to present us two options. Director Oglesby, I see you have your hand up, and Director Ramers, you're the one after that.
I'll be quick, but I want to make sure before Director Phillips has to leave, we go ahead and have a vote. But I support striking out LAFCO if they don't want to be designated. But I don't support LAFCO writing in the document designating entity. So if that's the motion, then I'm not going to support it now or in the future. We need to get away from supporting, trying to designate people. Like I said, I support what David is trying to do legally, but that doesn't mean I have to support it with a vote. And so I'm going to resist LAFCO changing the language, designating us, and then have me vote against what we've been voting against for the last 6 months. So be careful about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ramers.
I'm just going to clarify my understanding to the motion is that we would have a document with all the additional jurisdiction references that they've brought up, and we would have the language as is written now for LAFCO. There would be just the difference in the document would be whether we would insert a new paragraph for LAFCO or not. And that would be the difference of the two documents. Is that what we're hearing? The potential difference of the two documents. So LAFCO would still be involved in some wording one way or the other.
So I see nodding from staff. So I think we've had a good discussion. Is there anything else that anyone feels they need to say before we vote? Okay, so it might be helpful to restate the motion. So whoever on staff would like to do that, and that way we're clearer, and then we can vote.
Josh, would you do that?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. So what I heard was that we're gonna work with the jurisdictions to incorporate the language referencing all the agreements that we've accomplished in the last 6 months that are relevant and would be documented in the transition plan. And then we will work with LAFCO on alternative language, which we will present one version of the transition plan with language that's pretty consistent to what you've seen now, perhaps with some minor refinements, and one version that might incorporate this alternative view that gets worked out in cooperation with LAFCO. So we'll have two versions of a transition plan, one with the LAFCO language more consistent with what you've seen today, and an alternate version that might have substantial difference. Is that clear?
I see the maker of the motion has her finger raised and
Yeah, I
hand.
do have my finger up. So, yes, that is clear, except that the modifications by the jurisdiction, Ms. Damon's raised issues, as did I, excuse me, about other issues that need modified. It's not just that we're incorporating written contract language. There were some other specifics, and I think Kendall has those, and obviously that's up to council to review them. But that my understanding was council and Kendall Flint were going to be working with the jurisdictions to address the expressed concerns.
Correct.
So that.
Are we going to have, I have a question. Are we going to have
Yes.
time? I mean, are we going to have that before, if we're going to come back on Tuesday, is staff going to be able?
Well, that's what I was going to get to, you know, to the point of when we will need as much time as we can to get this back together. So I would say that the soonest would probably be Wednesday afternoon, but I think ideally, unfortunately, to Director Morton's concern, she doesn't want the Thursday, Friday, but if we could take it to Thursday and have the first vote on Thursday, and then if we need a second vote on Friday, we would just come back. But if we had to do it, I bet you we could probably get it done on Wednesday for a Wednesday meeting. That just means that it all has to be done by, you know, 1 o'clock on Tuesday. That means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it have to be noticed also? Are there notice requirements?
Yes, 24 hours.
Yeah, so
It's a
one
special meeting.
we would have to have it out 24 hours before the meeting.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
a question to the chair, why can't you have the first meeting on Friday and the second meeting
The following
Tuesday or
Well,
Monday?
Right.
Because the writing is what's going to take the time. LAFCO's meeting is on Monday. I don't see the first meeting, if that's Friday, do the second meeting you have Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah, okay. That's
That I would think that would be preferential. The point is to be able to collect the relevant changes from the entities. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to leave, but
Okay.
so,
We'll
thank
see you next week.
All right.
Thanks, John. Have a good weekend. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Looks like we also are starting to get some fog forming around when we might meet. But let's go ahead and vote. And then once we do that, we will do some meeting setup and see whether, see what that is. So we have a motion, we have a second, quite extensive discussion. Thank you. And now, Mr. Tregenza, if you would call the roll so we can vote.
Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams,
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti,
Aye.
Councilmember Lisa Berkeley,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton,
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye.
Councilmember John Wizard,
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
Aye.
and Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. You're on mute, Jane. Yeah.
Thank you. Well done, everyone. Thank you. So one thing building off the conversation that we just had about when we might schedule our meetings in case we need to, I wonder about whether we could just go ahead and meet on Friday for the initial presentation and discussion of the two options and see how the vote goes. And if we if and when we need the next meeting, we could then look at Monday or Tuesday of the following week, just so that we run out the 4 o'clock and not, not waste a single minute. So how does that sound to staff, that if we set the meeting for this initial discussion at the time that we were planning to possibly meet?
That works great. I would just, it would be perhaps useful to set a tentative second meeting like on Monday afternoon.
Let's do it.
As a placeholder.
Can people look at their calendars? To see, so Monday
afternoon is great. Let's make it at 1 o'clock.
That can work.
Does that work for most people? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up.
1 p.m. Monday the 29th.
Okay.
The actual final.
Yeah, we'll have the countdown of hours. And so if by chance we have a unanimous vote on Friday,
then we're good.
Then we're good. We can, but that would not be FORA-esque, and we don't want to do anything too radical at the very end. All right, now let's see. So the board packet. We have come to the end of our agenda for the day. I guess this is a special meeting, so I don't think we have to take a vote to stay here to hear from the public. So let me just quickly see if any member of the public has a comment they would like to make on any item not on today's agenda, and I see that Mr. Cheshire does.
Thank you, Chair Parker. I love and respect all of you. Let's start with that compliment. You're all fired up over 2 votes, setting all these meetings. I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the Authority Act. It says the transition plan shall be approved only by a majority vote of the board. If you only need a majority vote, you only need 1 meeting. If it doesn't pass there, you just make another motion and move on until you get a majority vote. Now, you might want to read it, you might want to check it out. I might be wrong, but I'm sitting here looking now on my other computer, and I just read you verbatim what it says. So I hope in one of these last efforts here before FORA closes, I'm saving you a little heartache and a little heartburn and such. And, you're going to get this done. But try and go by the rules. And the rules, I wish somebody had let me know, but I've read it since it voted on by poor old Senator Monning, whose ears have to be burning like hell right now. So anyway, you guys have a great weekend. Happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. And always happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. And all of you well. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And you'll get the letter I've been typing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cheshire. Any other member of the public wishing to comment on items not on today's agenda? I'm not seeing any hands, blue or otherwise. So any items from members?
Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Father's Day to all you colleagues.
Happy Juneteenth. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Juneteenth.
Director Carbone?
Yes, I just wanted to thank Colonel Ford for his participation, if he's still on this Zoom meeting, for his participation on the FORA board, and wish him well. He relinquishes his command from the Presidio. So I think he'll still be here till the end of the month at least. I believe that they're doing a changing of the guards, and there will be a new colonel coming on board. Colonel, I think it's pronounced Cohen. So just if he's there, just wanted to say that it was nice working with him.
Yeah.
So if I may, Mayor, thank you. Yes, I will ride FORA out till it ends. I will not change command till FORA dissolves, so no worries, I'm not going anywhere.
Oh, that's great. Great news. Okay, thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday. We are adjourned.